The palace burned with golden light, yet inside the emperor felt only darkness. Kublai Khan, ruler of worlds, grandson of Genghis, sat motionless before a silent banquet hall. The laughter of courtiers echoed faintly, but his heart could no longer find joy. Tonight, even the drums of celebration felt like drums of war inside his mind. In the year 1293, the great Mongol capital of Kublai, today's Beijing, was drowning in luxury. Marble halls stretched like rivers of white stone, and servants bowed at every turn. The empire had reached its peak under Kublai's rule, stretching from the frozen steppes of Siberia to the jungles of Vietnam. Yet, in his 60 years, the emperor felt heavier than ever before. The court still called him the Son of Heaven, but heaven had stopped answering. His empire had grown too large, his family too distant, his dreams too silent. The generals whispered of rebellions in the south. Ministers hid messages from the provinces. The great Khan, who once commanded thunder, now struggled to command his own heartbeat. At the center of it all was grief. Empress Chabi, his beloved, his equal in mind and will, was gone. Since her death, the light in the palace had dimmed. Her voice, once soft as silk and sharp as steel, no longer echoed through the jade halls. The musicians still played her favorite melodies, but every note reminded him of loss. Kublai would walk the silent corridors at night, his footsteps echoing like memories. He would touch her empty throne beside his, and sometimes he imagined she would return, whispering counsel in his ear as she used to when the empire was young. But the walls whispered something else now, words of deceit and ambition. Old rivals waited for him to weaken. Even his own blood, sons, grandsons, nephews, began to plot quietly in the shadows, dreaming of his throne. The mighty house of Genghis was cracking, one secret at a time. Still, the emperor refused to show despair. Each morning he dressed in gold robes, walked into the council chamber, and gave commands with a steady voice. But when night came, he would sit before the mirror and whisper, "Grandfather, what did I lose on the way to becoming you?" On a winter night, as the wind howled through the palace gates, Kublai received a sealed message, blood-stained and urgent. It came from the south, from a general who had once sworn eternal loyalty. As he broke the seal and read the words inside, the emperor's trembling hand let the scroll fall. The rebellion had begun, and it had his own family's name written upon it. The great palace bell rang through the frozen dawn. 3 slow tolls, a sound reserved only for death or disaster. Kublai Khan stood at his balcony, wrapped in heavy fur, watching the smoke rise over the city's southern gates. Each column of smoke was a message from his broken empire. Each flame, a whisper, "The Son of Heaven has lost his favor." The rebellion began like a sickness, silent at first, spreading from the heart of the south. What had started as a tax protest grew into an inferno. Peasants, warlords, and betrayed generals joined together under banners that once carried his face. Now they carried only vengeance. In the war chambers, Kublai's ministers knelt in fear. The map stretched across the marble table, marked with red stains. Each mark was a fortress lost, each stain a betrayal. And among the names of the traitors, one struck deeper than the rest: Prince Nomagan, his own grandson. The emperor's voice trembled for the first time in years. "My blood, my legacy, turns against me." No one dared to answer. He had once believed the Mongol spirit could never break. He was wrong. The vast empire that once thundered under Genghis Khan's banner was now a ghost of its glory. The roads that once carried armies now carried fear. The same soldiers who conquered kingdoms now fought each other for survival. At night, Kublai would sit alone before a dim brazier. The fire crackled, casting shadows that looked like armies across the walls. He would close his eyes and remember the steppe, the endless grasslands of his youth, where he had once ridden free under open skies. There had been no gold, no palaces, no thrones, only wind and freedom. Now, surrounded by jade and silk, he felt like a prisoner inside his own empire. Still, his pride refused to die. He sent messengers, armies, gold, but rebellion does not fear an aging emperor. It feeds on his weakness. Every victory his ancestors had earned was fading into dust. The empire was still vast, but its soul was crumbling, and Kublai felt it inside him, like a sickness he could not cure. Late one night, a shadow entered the emperor's private chamber, silent, cloaked, and trembling. It was one of his oldest guards, eyes filled with sorrow. He knelt and whispered, "My lord, the southern capital has fallen." Kublai rose slowly, gripping the arm of his throne. And then the guard spoke again, the final words that shattered the emperor's heart. "Your grandson now calls himself Khan." Snow fell like ashes over the imperial camp. Kublai Khan stood before his army, fewer now, older and weary, their faces pale under the ghostly sky. Once these men had conquered the world. Now they could barely hold their own land. The emperor's command tent trembled under the storm. Maps were pinned to the walls with daggers, each line drawn with desperate hope. For months, Kublai had been sending troops south to reclaim his provinces. But for every victory, 2 defeats returned. The once mighty Mongol cavalry, the fastest in history, now starved in the winter mud. His generals whispered in corners. Some blamed the cold, some blamed fate. But the emperor knew the truth. They blamed him. He was no longer the thunder of his youth. His hands shook when he signed commands. His breath came heavy, and in his heart he carried a silence that no victory could break, the silence of Empress Chabi's absence. Without her counsel, the empire had lost its balance. Without her faith, Kublai had lost himself. One night, as snow piled high outside, a general entered his tent, Commander Bayan, his most trusted warrior, the man who had once burned kingdoms for him. Bayan knelt and said, "My Khan, if you ride south now, you will not return." Kublai stared at him, eyes cold as the wind. "Then I will die in the saddle, not behind a throne." Bayan bowed, tears frozen to his beard. "Then let me ride in your place?" The emperor shook his head. "No, if my men are to die, they will die seeing their Khan beside them." And so he rode, through snow and hunger, through fields where once victory banners had flown. He rode past burned villages, empty temples, and the bodies of children who once called him heaven's ruler. Each step of his horse felt heavier than the last, as though the empire itself clung to his soul. When they reached the rebel lines, the battle was chaos. The roar of cannons shook the ground. Arrows screamed through the fog. And there, across the field, Kublai saw a familiar banner, his grandson's emblem fluttering in betrayal. Bayan tried to shield him, shouting, "Right back, my Khan!" But Kublai did not move. His eyes were fixed on that banner. The symbol of his blood turned against him. The fighting raged for hours. When it ended, snow covered the dead like a burial cloth. Bayan returned to camp, wounded, carrying Kublai's broken sword. The emperor had fallen from his horse, unconscious and fevered, not by blade, but by sorrow. As the army retreated north, Kublai opened his eyes inside a cold tent. He reached for his sword, but found only emptiness. Bayan knelt beside him, whispering through tears, "My Khan, your body will heal, but loyalty is dead." The drums of the south had gone silent. For the first time in decades, no messenger rode through the palace gates, no victory cry echoed through the city. Only the wind howled through the towers of Kanbalik, the voice of a dying empire. And Kublai Khan, once the conqueror of kingdoms, now sat beneath the same sky that had crowned his grandfather, and wondered if heaven had turned its back. The emperor's illness worsened. Fever clung to him like a ghost. Each morning, servants lit incense to mask the smell of sickness that hung around his chambers. The physicians spoke in whispers, mixing potions, burning herbs, offering prayers that even they no longer believed in. But no medicine could heal the wound that lay inside him, the wound of regret. He would wake in the night, calling Chabi's name, only to find cold air beside him. He would ask for reports from his generals, but they arrived slower each week, until none came at all. In the council hall, empty thrones gathered dust where his ministers once sat. Some had fled, others had betrayed him. The empire that had once obeyed his every word now answered with silence. Outside, the streets of Kanbalik changed. Merchants whispered that the Mongol spirit had died. Farmers said heaven had withdrawn its blessing. Even the palace guards avoided his gaze, for in his eyes they saw not the son of heaven, but a man waiting for death. And yet, in moments of clarity, Kublai still dreamed. He dreamed of uniting the fractured world, of seeing the Mongol banners fly again across the horizon. He would demand his attendants bring maps, and with trembling hands, he would trace the routes his armies once took, through deserts, over rivers, through cities that had once bowed to his name. But his hands would stop at the southern border, where rebellion had torn the map apart. He would stare at that torn edge for hours, his breath shallow, his eyes wet. Even heaven, he whispered once, can fall. One evening, his loyal general Bayan returned, limping, face hollow from war. He knelt before the emperor, clutching a torn flag, the last banner of the Yuan army. "My Khan," he said softly, "the rebels have taken the southern sea. The armies are no more?" Kublai looked at the flag, frayed and burned, then nodded slowly. He did not weep. He simply said, "Then heaven has chosen another." That night, thunder rolled across the capital, though no storm was in sight. As the candles flickered in his chamber, Kublai whispered to the empty air, "Grandfather, if you see me from the eternal blue sky, tell me, did I fail you?" The thunder answered like a drum of war, and somewhere deep inside the palace, a mirror cracked. The moon hung low over Khanbalik, pale and watchful. Inside the forbidden palace, the sound of silk rustled like whispers of ghosts. Kublai Khan, once the voice of destiny, now lay in silence. The conqueror of continents was fighting his final war, not against men, but against time. The palace corridors glowed with lanterns, their flames trembling in the cold air. Servants walked quietly, as if afraid that even sound might disturb the dying emperor. Bayan, his old general, stood guard outside the chamber, eyes hollow. He had seen kingdoms fall, but never something as fragile as this moment. Inside, the emperor lay upon a golden bed draped in white. The same man who had ordered the building of cities, the conquest of empires, now could not lift his hand without trembling. The empire he built still stretched across the horizon, but he knew deep down that its heart was gone. As he drifted in and out of fever, visions came to him. He saw the endless steppe, the land of his birth, the cradle of his people. He saw his grandfather Genghis riding across the horizon, calling his name. He saw Chabi waiting beneath the eternal blue sky, her hand extended, her smile unchanged by death. Tears rolled down his wrinkled face as he whispered, "Wait for me, my empress, I am coming home." Outside, the ministers gathered to write new decrees, already discussing succession. The empire moved on even as its emperor lay dying. But Bayan refused to leave his side. He knelt near the bed and said softly, "You gave everything, my Khan. Even heaven must honor you." Kublai smiled weakly. "Heaven honors no man who forgets mercy," he whispered. "Tell them. Tell my son, power means nothing without peace." He coughed, blood staining the silk sheets. The candles flickered, the walls seemed to bend, and in that dim light, he saw his ancestors standing before him. Warriors, riders, conquerors. They said nothing. They simply waited. Kublai reached toward them. For the first time in decades, his hands stopped trembling. A calm filled the room. Deep, quiet, eternal. He closed his eyes. The last emperor of the Mongol line exhaled once, slow, steady, and the wind outside carried his breath into the night sky. They said that moment, the moon dimmed over China. The empire did not fall with a roar, but with a whisper. In the silence that followed, Bayan bowed beside the body and murmured through tears, "The world once trembled before your shadow, my Khan, but heaven trembles for you now."